Welcome to Money Talks, a series of interviews with me, Liam Halligan, economics and business editor of GBNews. In this episode, recorded during the COP27 summit, I talked to former Brexit Secretary Lord David Frost. Until early 2020, Frost was known only to Whitehall and Westminster insiders. But after then Prime Minister Boris Johnson appointed him as the UK's chief Brexit negotiator, he became a household name. In December 2021, Frost resigned from government, saying he admired Johnson, but he couldn't support what was then called Plan B, the tightening of anti-COVID restrictions. Since then, he's written a weekly Daily Telegraph column and plied his trade in the upper house, remaining a man of considerable influence. In this interview, Lord Frost cast doubt on the government's net zero 2050 target, while accusing Prime Minister Rishi Sunak of hypocrisy for cutting a deal to import huge amounts of fracked gas from the US, while not allowing UK fracking. Frost also warns against raising taxes into the teeth of recession and tighter monetary policy, which he says risks throwing the UK economy into a vicious downward spiral. Lord Frost, thanks a lot for appearing on Money Talks. You've decided to join the GWPF as a trustee. Why did you make that decision?
So I think one of the things we most need on the whole energy climate change issue at the moment is open debate, full and frank debate about all the issues, discussion, nothing excluded. And the GWPF has been really good over the last decade or more in promoting that, in trying to give an objective view of what's going on, putting out educational material, trying to widen the debate. And I'm very keen to be part of that.
What would you say to those who accuse people who question the economic strategy around climate change of being climate change deniers? It's pretty evocative language, isn't it?
It is, and I don't think it's helpful at all to use that sort of language. Very few people, in my view, think that climate change is not happening. Very few people think there isn't some human element to it. The question is, what do we do about it? And in my view, we're not in a climate emergency or a climate crisis in the very hysterical way that some people like to suggest. We do have a problem. And the way to adapt to that problem is through adaptation and through being serious about the kind of energy supplies that we're trying to develop. And we can go at that soberly, seriously, properly, without getting stuck on a path that is not going to deliver what we want. And that's my worry at the moment, that we're rushing at it. We're trying to do too much too quickly. The technologies aren't available and we're running into problems, as we're finding out this year.
To what extent do you think the combination of the war in Ukraine, the impact on international energy prices, and the cost of living squeeze, they're related of course but separate, to what extent do you think they're changing the debate around not so much climate change itself but our reaction to climate change?
Yeah, they are beginning to, because they're forcing some realism in the subject, that we are facing the prospect of at least severe strain on our energy supplies this winter. They're getting extremely expensive. People are focusing on what really matters, which is not only how much carbon does the energy supply emit, but do the lights come on when I turn the switch? Do I have security of supply? Can I afford it? And those are crucial things. So I think the war, the cost of living crisis, they've brought it into people's mind. Of course, they're not the fundamental cause of some of the problems that we face. That goes a bit deeper.
What did you think as you watched COP26 in Glasgow last year? And do you think the UK's response has changed now we've had COP27 in Egypt?
Well, it's hard to tell. I think it's always difficult when you're hosting something yourself. You always want to make it a success. We've now handed over the presidency to the Egyptians in COP27, and I hope that a lot has changed in that intervening year. I think we need to move away from the how to put this, the kind of assumption that there's only one way of dealing with this problem, squeezing out all other debates, squeezing out people who want to widen the frame of debate, and having a more rational discussion about what we're trying to do. And I think we are beginning to see that now. I think things are changing, but it is very, very slow. And it worries me that certain opinions are still difficult to express. It worried me during the pandemic that certain issues got squeezed out of the debate, some of which turned out to be perfectly reasonable, and we mustn't do the same with climate. Free speech, free debate, exchange of ideas is always the best way of getting the best solutions.
What do you think the former Prime Minister Boris Johnson meant when he described your views on wind farms as, quotes, medieval?
So I said wind farms are a medieval technology and windmills are a medieval technology. They were developed in the early Middle Ages and they were largely replaced when we found something better. First of all, coal, and that's where we had the Industrial Revolution in this country, and then gas and then nuclear. And I think it's a misconception to think that we can suddenly replace all those very effective forms of energy with renewables and wind. So, I'm not quite sure what Boris meant by that. He, of course, has himself been a bit more sceptical about some of these issues in the past, and maybe he will yet be again.
Yeah, let's talk. You know him well. You were by his side during some of the most fraught negotiations in this country's modern history. You were the greatest frost since the Great Frost.
Yeah.
When was it?
1709.
1709.
Yeah.
So clearly he has enormous respect for you. How do you think his views on climate change has shifted? Some people think when he talks about climate catastrophe, when he talks about urgency, he doesn't actually believe what he's saying.
Well, I think he does. He's a remarkable guy. I have a lot of respect for him. I think he is a convinced proponent of net zero, and he's obviously changed his mind on that subject. He does usually get to the right solutions in the end. Maybe he just hasn't got there yet, I think would be my view. And as he looks at the reality of the energy market in this country and across the West and what renewables can actually do, I like to think and hope he may yet come to a different view on this.
Do you think net zero within the time frame that we're proposing is realistic?
I'm doubtful, I've got to say. I don't think that rushing at the 2050 deadline as we have it in the UK and Europe is necessarily going to work. I don't think the technologies are quite ripe yet. It's too easy to say all we need to do is have more wind farms and more solar until we get the ability to store power, until the intermittency problem is solved, really properly solved. I struggle to see that these technologies are going to do everything we want and that they'll be useful in more than a marginal way. I think the right way of going at this is gas to nuclear and lots of research into other possibilities. And I don't know whether that is consistent with 2050. I'm doubtful.
Do you think this ban on new petrol and diesel cars coming in 2030, it's fast down the track, do you think that will actually happen, David?
It's a good question. I am doubtful, to be honest, that the market is quite ripe, that the grid is ready for the increase in power. I think we might see some perverse effects in the market in the run-up as people try and get petrol, diesel cars before it happens. I think the general problem with this, though, is that government is trying to pick winners. It's trying to choose the way forward. Ban petrol cars, force heat pump boilers. I don't think that's
electric vehicles.
Yeah, exactly. I don't think it's the right way.
Isn't there a danger that electric vehicles are a blind alley? We're really dependent on lithium, on copper. There's 5 times more copper in an EV than a conventional car.
Yeah.
We're making ourselves dependent again on foreign powers that have got this stuff. We haven't got it.
Yeah, I think the problem that we've got is that government is trying to pick winners and choose technologies, and all of modern history shows that tends not to end very well because governments tend not to be very good at doing that. Best way is to let the market work. Put in a carbon tax, put in the emissions trading scheme or whatever, but let the market sort out what the most efficient and most effective way is. Maybe it won't be electric cars. Maybe it'll be something else. Hydrogen could be. I mean, it has some promise, I think, from people who are looking at this, but who knows? the best way is to let the churn of the market, innovation, work and deliver the results.
Let me just ask you something specifically on hydrogen, David. Many leading industrialists that I know, people at JCB, people like Andrew Forrest, who runs Fortescue Mining, one of the most successful Australian business leaders of all time, they think hydrogen technology is a lot better than electric vehicle technology because you do the electrolysis, that can come from renewables, come from anywhere, and then you can store it as hydrogen. Where do you think the government is on this hydrogen strategy?
So, I mean, they're obviously very interested in it, and a lot of research is going into it at the moment, and I think rightly so. But of course, how you generate the hydrogen, how you create it, also matters quite a lot. But even if hydrogen at the moment looks slightly more promising, I don't know. Even if it does, who knows what's going to happen in some other field of technology in the next decade or so. So we must remain open to advances, not get locked in to something that may turn out not to be the best way forward.
What do you make of the fact that in the middle of COP26 we're announcing that we're going to become a lot more dependent on American liquefied natural gas crossing the Atlantic? It's extremely expensive in the aftermath of a confirmation of the fracking ban. It seems that we've got our thinking a bit muddled, no?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if we are dependent on somebody, I'd rather it was the Americans than the Russians or plenty of other players around the world. But even so, it's best to do your own energy if you possibly can, and you can do it cost effectively. And we still can do North Sea gas and oil. We've discouraged investment, and now we need to change that fast. I'm personally in favour of at least trying fracking and seeing if we can do that. And I think there's a degree of hypocrisy in those who won't do fracking in the UK but are perfectly happy to import large quantities of fracked gas from the US or Qatar or wherever else. I think it is just a bit kind of unreasonable to look at it in that way. We should be responsible for our own security of supply as far as we possibly can.
And it's not like we're making a deal with the US government. We are basically entering the marketplace to become more reliant on hard-nosed US private sector gas exporters, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
They're not going to do us any favours, are they?
No, I mean, the market is the market. We have discovered that if you want a reliable supply of gas, and we've discovered this over the last few months, you may have to pay quite a lot of money for it because that's the way the market is. And that will be true wherever you get it from.
Let's look ahead to November the 17th, if we may. What do you make of the general strategy here? We're on the brink of recession, if not in recession. The tax burden in this country is already at a 70-year high, and we're about to increase it even more.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, we don't quite know yet what the strategy is. We've got to wait for 17th of November. Obviously, the Liz Truss government had a very, very free market, supply side, low tax if we could get it model. And then we seem to have swung right over under Jeremy Hunt to George Osborne style austerity, increasing taxes, cutting spending, whatever. What we need to do is get somewhere, for now at least, in the middle of those two things, restore confidence, but crucially set a direction. We must still retain the aspiration to increase the productive capacity of this country, to make everybody wealthier, more productive, more successful in their work and their daily lives. And if we give up on that aspiration, then we're heading for decline. So I hope the government will keep saying it.
There clearly are going to be tax rises under a range of headings. What are the dangers of raising taxes now, David, when the economy is clearly slowing and we already have the highest tax burden since Clement Attlee?
Yeah, I mean, there's a real risk of raising taxes into a recession, especially when interest rates, monetary policy is getting tighter as well. There are very few examples, if any, in the world of countries that have consolidated their way into growing. What tends to happen more is budgetary consolidation begins to slow growth, crush the economy. You therefore have to consolidate even further, and you get onto a vicious cycle. And some of the Eurozone countries have got into that at times.
Do you think we're in a danger of a vicious downward spiral?
I mean, I I don't know yet. I think you just got to be cautious when it's clear that, economic conditions are getting worse, that we're not making our own life more difficult. But, the Prime Minister and the Chancellor are well aware of this, and I guess we've got to wait and see what they actually do.
Do you think we're through these political squalls now, 4 chancellors in as many months? Didn't look good, did it?
It didn't look good. I think that, I hope we are. I think everybody's a bit exhausted by it all and needs a bit of stability. To get the stability, the Prime Minister, the government, is going to have to develop a programme that has something for everybody. That's economically, also politically, issues like immigration and so on. We've got to have something that everybody can get behind. And if you can do that, and I think there's a good chance you can, if you can do that, then we will have some stability and we can move forward, in a better way. I think, though, what we're seeing is, the British political system is still adjusting to Brexit. There has been a change in our economic model in all kinds of ways. The economy has changed and is in the process of change, and we're seeing the political system reflect that. And we do have a politics where people debate things strongly, argue it out, and it's quite brutal at times, and that's what we've seen. But we tend to get to the right results doing that, and I hope that's what we will do.
What's your advice to Rishi Sunak?
I think try and develop a programme that everybody can get behind. Don't pivot to austerity. Keep focus on increasing production, increasing supply side reform. Try and bring everybody with you so that people feel the government is stable and can get behind it.
And what's your message, Lord Frost, to Kwasi Kwarteng and Liz Truss?
They should have stuck to their guns. The great disappointment to me was not that they made mistakes. They certainly did make mistakes, but people do make mistakes in government. It was that they got pushed off what they were trying to do too quickly, I think, and didn't push forward, didn't adjust, didn't prepare, didn't try and keep the focus on growth, productivity, making the economy stronger. So it's a great pity, but there it is.
10-year gilt yields are currently back where they were before the mini-budget, even though big chunks of the mini-budget have actually been implemented, not least the national insurance cut. Do you think it really was the mini-budget that freaked out government debt markets? I mean,
it feels like it was the sort of immediate cause, but I'm not sure it was the underlying reason. I think it provoked people to take a look at the British economy in a different way, obviously. I think the very, very generous energy bailout was probably a bigger reason. Probably, a certain cavalierness about the fiscal planning probably on the day didn't really help. But I think that was the underlying problem. People suddenly looked and thought, I'm not sure, and and the government was not able to say enough. It had not prepared the ground. It had not explained, and people took fright. And I think that could have been recovered. It was being recovered, and it's a pity that we didn't carry on doing that.
You are a widely respected figure. You're particularly widely respected, if I may say so, across the grassroots of the Conservative Party. Do you see yourself having a role in this Sunak government, if it's going to last at least until the next general election?
So I didn't look for a role. I think the Prime Minister has enough difficulties in balancing the party and reflecting all currents of opinion without worrying about me. If I am able to support and help, of course I'm happy to. Meanwhile, I'm able to just try and get my views out, try and explain, try and say what I think needs to be done. And I think I find a lot of people agree with me on this, and I'll carry on saying it.
Lord David Frost, thanks a lot for appearing on Money Talks.
Thanks a lot, it's a pleasure.
Thanks a lot for listening to Money Talks with me, Liam Halligan, Economics and Business Editor of GBNews. If you've enjoyed this episode, then please leave a rating or review on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you're listening. Do subscribe to this podcast. GB News, Britain's news channel.